What's up guys, it's Blake with Whitewater Reptiles, and today we're going to talk about ball pythons. So you can find these guys for very cheap or very expensive. The most expensive one on Morph Market currently is $40,000.
What? What? Tim!
Now when we're talking about enclosures for a pet ball python, we're looking at something like the enclosure behind us here that Angus is in for an adult ball python. We're looking at a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot enclosure. Now that is fairly substantial in an average size home. That's going to take up a fair bit of space. That's something to consider when you're getting one of these guys. Another thing to consider, and we'll touch base on, is UVB for a ball python. You're going to have to do a little bit of research. These guys are going to need something like Arcadia or Reptisun. Those are our two reputable known brands. We're going to want like a T5 6% bulb 15 to 18 inches from that basking spot, or we're going to want a T5 2.5% bulb 10 to 15 inches from that basking spot. The amount of morphs or color mutations in these guys have resulted in quite a bit of variation in the amounts of melanin in these guys. For example, Mickey here is a banana ball python. So as you can see, he's not your typical brown and black ball python. He does have a lighter color variation than what some may be used to seeing at a pet store. But that being said, he might be a little more susceptible to sunlight. That doesn't mean he couldn't have UVB. That just means that we might want to consider more opportunity to have hiding spots or shade or coverage in that enclosure. Now when we're heating these kinds of animals, we're going to want to use something like a basking bulb or a halogen bulb. Really whatever it takes to get yourself to a 75 to 80 degree cool side and an 85 to 92 degree warm side with a 90 to 92 degree basking spot ideally. Now when we're talking about humidity with ball pythons, we're going to want to keep that humidity around 60%. A lot of the things you're going to see online are going to say somewhere between 40 and 60%. But we're starting to find out that might be just a little bit too low. So let's try to keep that humidity around 60%, and we can go ahead and bump that up a little bit. Somewhere around 70% is going to be perfectly fine when these guys are shedding. Another thing we absolutely want to discuss about ball pythons is feeding regimen. You're going to want to be on a rat-based diet. And these guys are going to eat weekly when they're younger, and once they get a bit of weight on them and they become, that adult, sub-adult stage, going bi-weekly or every other week is going to be okay. So when we're talking about feeding them, we kind of need to know what size rat we're going to feed them. Obviously, that can fluctuate a lot between a small pinky rat all the way up to an adult rat. Now, the way we know what size prey we're going to feed our ball python is going to be based off of the size of your ball python itself. Ball pythons are typically weighed in grams. So we're going to figure out the weight of your ball python in grams, and we're going to correlate that with a feeding chart to determine what size prey it should be eating. I'll put a chart right here. Something worth noting about ball pythons is unfortunately they can be picky eaters, so you may struggle to get them to eat frozen thawed food or pre-killed food initially. However, I strongly recommend we do not feed live prey to any snake personally. I really think it's just ideal not only for your snake, because there can be injuries while feeding. That rat could bite your snake, it could lead to infections, especially say your snake doesn't take that meal and you don't watch it. Aside from that, I do find it relatively inhumane for that rodent. I know it happens in the wild, but there's really no reason to be doing that in captivity. These guys will drink straight from a watering dish, and they should have access to water at all times. So let's keep a watering dish in their enclosure, and let's make sure that we fill that maybe 2-3 times a week so they have water access at all times. The big yawn. So these guys do come in an awful lot of color variations. You're also going to see a lot of different patterns in these guys. Things such as speckling, spiderweb patterns, pinstriping. The last thing I want to touch on with ball pythons is a substrate. I personally use something called a Repti chip. You could also use cocoa fiber, you could use cypress mulch. Some people use aspen, which I do not recommend. It does not hold humidity well, and it does tend to mold. Overall, these guys can be very rewarding pets. I really enjoy keeping them. They're an awful lot of fun. I would recommend something like a corn snake or some other subspecies of rat snake. They can be picky eaters, and really that can be quite problematic, especially for a beginner keeper. They do have some humidity requirements that can be relatively difficult to retain, especially for a beginner. Like any animal that I talk about on this channel, just make sure you do your research. Make sure that you're really passionate about the animal you're considering getting. I do think there are better options for beginner snake keepers to consider over a ball python, but if your heart's set on one, I think it is a very obtainable goal to have a ball python as a first snake. Well, with that being said, guys, don't forget to like the video, say hi down below in the comments, subscribe if you're not already, and I'll see you in the next one.